If you read closely, Socrates never actually recommends the complex social hierarchies of the guardians, their regimented lifestyle, planned reproductive system, the ordeals they have to go through, the noble lies they have to see through to assume leadership positions. He never recommends that as the state of affairs in the ideal society. When he goes to examine the perfectly just human community, he describes a simple village lifestyle, similar economically to what you would have seen in Neolithic Greece. You have people who build houses, people who make shoes, people who grow grapes and make wine and simple sweets. And, he doesn't go into all this elaborate detail of the Guardian Society until his interlocutors say that this just society should be able to claim new territory if their population expands, and they should be able to defend themselves from aggressors. So then Socrates complies and goes on to describe the constitution that is the main topic of the Republic itself. But that's not the ideal society. That's the ideal bellicose society. Assuming we have to defend ourselves, assuming that we live in an age where mankind is warlike and fallen, then we need this kind of society where the people at the top give up their freedom, give up their private property, give up the notion of their private family and their private well-being, consider each other to be brothers and sisters, fathers and daughters mutually, and exist for the good of the state, dedicate their lifestyle to becoming the ideal warriors, guardians, auxiliaries, and statesmen. So that's the place of that ideal society, and that's reinforced by what is said in the story of Atlantis. Now, first of all, I don't think Plato even affirms that simple Neolithic village as the absolute ideal of the human condition. He describes the age of Cronus, the Cronian age, as a more blessed condition of humanity generally. But such a condition can hardly even be called a social condition. People don't have to build houses. Nature simply sustains their existence. They dedicate their time to philosophy. It's kind of a superhuman way of being, and interestingly is also kind of the Paleolithic human condition. So Plato was very interested in previous ways of life, and he speculated that people before complex economic systems may have actually attained a higher state of consciousness. They weren't more primitive in his eyes. The Stone Age would have been a kind of peak philosophical age, a golden age of humanity. And then once that Cronian age ends, we're in the reign of Zeus. Nature no longer just sustains us. Then we have to transition to a lifestyle where we toil in the soil and, grow our food. We have to build our shelters, etc. And that's the ideal society at the beginning of the Republic. Then we move into a warlike phase, and when you need that is when you run into a force like Atlantis, right? Atlantis is described as originally having been constituted of people who lived according to nature. Poseidon created their distinctive ringed island. They had natural, springs of cold and hot water. Their needs were met, right? Fruits just grew out of the ground in their Atlantic island. So they were in that Cronian age and attained virtue and cared about philosophy. And when that age ended for them, they didn't go for the simple village lifestyle. They, given their kind of strategic advantage on their island, subdued other populations. This is a confederation of distinct kingdoms with distinct lifestyles and led by the various sons of Poseidon. But it sounds to me like this is a multicultural empire, not dissimilar to the Persians, right? This is kind of a mirrored version of the Persian expansions that Athens also held back, right? It's instead of coming from the east, the Atlanteans come from the west. So you can see where Plato might have gotten some of these ideas if the story is not, in fact, genuine. But yeah, the Proto-Athens is founded by Athena, 9,600 BC, 9,000 years before the time of Solon. And out of her wisdom, she creates this ideal bellicose state in order to defend the freedom of the other peoples of the Mediterranean. So that's the moral of the story with Atlantis. The Atlantean inclination is towards material acquisition. They want power, they want control over others, and the ruling class wants to reap all of those material benefits and hoard them up. And what happens? They are punished by Zeus. Their island is destroyed. And first, they're defeated by an actual virtuous human community, where the people at the top of the hierarchy give up their freedom. They are fully transparent. The people at the bottom are hardly described, and they're simply allowed to do what they would do in that simple village. You know, the cobblers can just be cobblers. Plato's Republic does not describe a society where the members in the bottom castes have to go through all of this complex stuff that the guardians do. But the people who are actually in charge of a state, I think Plato believed, should be held accountable, should be public citizens, should be transparent. The Atlanteans are the opposite, right? Their rulers have secret rituals. They're at the center of their, secluded isle. The Athenian guardians live in the open. And it's interesting that Francis Bacon, who was certainly aware of Platonism, decides to emulate the Atlanteans. And in his New Atlantis, the Atlantean society is secret. No one knows that it even exists. It's not like, a city on a hill that everyone can see. It's not a light for others. It is a covert society that recruits intelligent members of other societies, has this secret scientific research, and, subtly interferes in the goings-on of other nations to establish a new kind of world. Bacon also inverts the epistemological method of antiquity. Instead of removing ourselves from particulars and going back to these ideal forms that the material world is generated from, Bacon has us looking further and further into the material world. Observation is not enough for Bacon. We have to start experimenting and devising novel material circumstances so that we can study them. So Bacon inverts that Platonic morality. He sides with the Atlantean way, which is multicultural and imperial, instead of with the Proto-Athens, which is transparent and where the leadership is out in the public eye and held accountable. And yet, I mean, can you argue with the results? Bacon's New Atlantis has been realized. I mean, in a lot of ways, America is the new Atlantis. We do have this kind of scientific, occult uh, oligarchy. And what did we do with it? Well, we walked on the moon. For thousands of years, human beings have looked up at the stars and looked for patterns and looked for meaning. Americans looked up, the new Atlantis looked up and said, yeah, I think we can get there. So the Baconian turn has its advantages, perhaps. It also has a lot of dangers. Right now, America might be that new Atlantis, and the Atlanteans were imperialistic, domineering. They took away people's freedoms. Maybe a proto-Athenian society would be beneficial. Athena, in her wisdom, ought to set about forming such a thing. But yeah, I just wanted to go into the moral lesson of Plato's Atlantis. It's been taken in a lot of different ways. Atlantis was never the ideal society for Plato, I believe. If anything, like Paleolithic hunter-gatherers were the ideal society. Second best is a simple Neolithic village. And then if you have to have a state and you have to use force, well, then the people that are actually in charge have to give up their private wealth, give up their notion of private interest, dedicate themselves to the state so that they can preserve the freedom of others. So that's what I have to say. Thank you guys for listening. God bless.